Hey, it's Ember. So I was revisiting some old songs of mine, and it's amazing to me. They bring me to tears that they are transcursive transmissions. And what do I mean by that? That they came through me like a transmission without any edits. It's not like I sat down and said, I want to write a song. It's like I felt something in my heart and just at that time sat down wherever I was, and all the lyrics came to me at once, maybe associated with an initial chord. And I just let the light come cleanly through. Never any edits, never going back to any song, and just letting the song come through as a clean transmission. So why is it transcursive? And what is transcursion versus recursion? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. Um, and and so I want to go back to the model that I have tattooed on my arm, and it can be, um, you know, simplified into the one became many so that I may know myself. As above, so below, an understanding of the cosmic mind as it comes through us. And if you imagine, sort of before the colloquial Big Bang, this idea of an initial frequency, you might say the initial undistorted signal, all of reality being frequency, all of reality being, you might say information, but even more fundamental for me is frequency. And that frequency, the undistorted signal of alpha omega, the ultimate eschatological beginning and the ultimate eschatological end, even though we're not thinking about things linearly, this is like a frequency globe of a non-linear cosmic mind. And so if we begin with this initial cosmic mind, alpha omega, we can call it love as structure, collective truth. In my song Omega, I kind of have this wild ending where I say collective truth is the only truth. Collective truth is the only truth. And I say, let it stream through me. Let this stream through me. Let me see much more clearly. And so, and also part of the song is let's watch it all roll. I must watch it all roll down that stream. And I'm going to try to explain why this is a transcursive song that talks about the hinge point between recursion and transcursion. And so now going back to the model, the one became many so that I may know myself. We're talking about a cosmic mind reflecting, reflecting, reflecting. Consciousness is never created, but merely reflected down what you might call a hallway of mirrors. And so in the initial stages of what we can call a meta spiral of becoming within the cosmic mind, you have spiral 1, 2, and 3. Spiral 1 could be defined as a sort of a sine wave. Again, all this frequency. The sine wave, again, think about the stages of consciousness even in human beings. We all go through stages towards maturity. Now I'm speaking about that from a cosmic sense. And so the first stage you might akin to a sine wave. The sine wave is a clean signal, but it has no form of retention. It has no form of identifying this node or neuron within the cosmic mind in its own self-contained, even though nothing is broken, everything is still an emanation of that one mind. Consciousness is never created but merely reflected. But still, in this initial stages of the meta-spiral of becoming, the meta-spirals of consciousness, there's no methodology for retaining that initial the spark, that initial undistorted signal as it moves through each node or neuron of consciousness. And so think about it, language is more simple, you know culture is more simple, and minds, like the evolution of the periodic table of elements, for example, or this progression of the second law of thermodynamics, you might say from a 3D sense, through the chemical evolution. Similarly, I'm talking about the evolution of mind, the more primary structure of reality as frequency rather than 3D reality. So again, the sine wave of the first metastage, which I'm calling spiral 1, is it doesn't have any phase lock. It doesn't have any way to if all of reality is frequency, or like light slowed down to a slower vibration of embodiment through this evolutionary process, then the evolutionary process is no longer a process of survival, as seen from this perspective, but a process of self-knowledge at the cosmic stage, at the meta stage. And so that's the angle that I'm trying to paint here. And so this initial stage is like a sine wave, because the light comes completely through, but culture, mind, structure of mind has not progressed enough to give us some sort of retention, a way to take in the light form and reflect it within our own structure. It's almost like each time we want to touch the cosmic mind, we have to sit down and pray again, or bring into that feeling through ritual, through early human ritual or prayer or ceremony. And then notice that even though it might be a clean signal at the time, again, it's not like it's almost like there's a constant feeling of disconnection from that ultimate mind. And again, consciousness is never created down the line. There's no new broken sequence where, oh, now there's a new consciousness. It's only reflected down that hallway of mirrors, the hallway of frequency. And so when spiral 1 goes to spiral 2, again in a meta stage of becoming, spiral 2 is where we have the hallway of mirrors as we would know it through culture, through form, through measure. You know, we have Rene Descartes, who, even though he was inspired by angelic dreams, you know, had rule and measure, and I think therefore I am. And we began a process of trying to define ourselves through this bouncing back and forth through reflective mirrors, this trapping the light and trying to reflect it back and forth through ideas and conceptualize. So no longer was it a ceremonial, ritualistic prayer contact with reality, but it was this, let me try to define it through concept, which creates its own type of separation and its own type of broken signal hallway of mirrors. In other words, if there's one undistorted signal, and through the proliferation of different types of consciousness across time, again, second law of thermodynamics pointing to a progression of mind that I'm now putting within sort of a almost panpsychic lens of frequency, then you have this ever pushing on into higher and higher complexities of amalgamations of minds collectivizing. And so in the second spiral, that collectivizing happened through measure, rule, concept. And that concept defined us. We tried to define ourselves through what we could say conceptually about ourselves and bounce off between each other within cultural concept. And so what happens here is that we gain lots, right? We have lots of progression, lots of technology, lots of culture, lots of proliferation. But what happens is we separate the body from the mind. The signal from the one doesn't come cleanly through, and our connection to what you might call the God mind, divine, really the frequency at large of collective truth becomes subjugated, divided, separated, and you know, obviously that creates a lot of problems. And I imagine it like the broken hallway of mirrors, that one signal is distorted like a bad game of cosmic telephone, where that one, it's almost like, you know, the game of telephone. Someone has a message initially, and that message across time gets distorted because of each person trying to pick up the phone and give their own version of the message. And without an ability to phase lock the light, you end up distorting the signal and looping, and you might call it a recursive loop, which, you know, so in other words, all of us are part of the becoming of that one became many so that I may know myself. And in that progression of mind, in order for the one, the alpha omega, for that God mind to know itself, it needs creative signals, harmonies across time, harmonizing to that root tone, that undistorted signal. And so spiral 2, again, is the hallway of mirrors, the broken hallway of mirrors. And we had an ability to define ourselves like never before, but usually that ends up just looping back into self-concepts that didn't actually have us a connection with the divine. We didn't let the light come completely through. we conceptualize the light. We always stood behind some sort of conceptual shield, and that usually tends within our culture to create fear, containment, and control. And spiral 3 then is about high fidelity embodiment, high fidelity love. Not love as a feeling, not love as, oh, I love my family member or my dog, but the lower emanation at the frequency version of love. That love as collective truth, love as collective structure of frequency, love as the original unbroken emanation of that signal now pouring through us. Imagine like Indra's web, or in other words, a spider web with like a bunch of dewdrops. Let's say holographic dewdrops that are reflecting the one mind. So imagine like a flashlight shining in from the outside, in this metaphor, and the light shines through, and each of us have an opportunity within our particular vessel, in our own particular way, to let that light come cleanly through and reflect it without breaking the signal. And most of us break the signal because we've been imprinted through trauma, through pain, through culture, to put ourselves into boxes, to define ourselves through concept, and not to feel the clear signal of the emanation of our vessel and our being come cleanly through our hearts. And so spiral 3 is not an ascension into the heavens. It's not, anything like we're moving away from this place. It's actually higher definition reality, where letting the light come cleanly through. For example, in my process, HRT and accepting my trans identity, putting it out there, taking HRT, now I'm about 9 months in, was one of the first major clicks in my life where I felt like suddenly there was no more distorted looping. There was no more dissociation in the mirror. And just using my personal example, why is that? It's like the clean signal comes through me. No longer was I trying to shame it, hide it, put it in a box, be something else for somebody else. Undistorted signal coming through me, coming through my dewdrop, without me trying to bend it, fearfully contain it, fearfully distort it through concept, through culture, means undistorted sovereignty. Undistorted signal through undistorted sovereignty. Spiral 3 is all about the harmony, not hierarchy, almost as if we are all playing a jazz song and we all connect to the root tone. And let's say we have a bunch of people sitting in a room and there's the root tone being played, and no one knows really what to do for a while, and all of a sudden someone comes up with, hey, you could play something like this, and some people say, well, okay, let me try that, I'll play something like that. And that's this recursive loop, because now we have these people who are trying to regurgitate recursive versions of that root tone, not in their own sovereign creative ways, because inevitably they are breaking their own signal through looking at their trauma not as the curvature that gives sovereignty to their holographic dewdrop, or their own vessel shining that one light within the one became many so that I may know myself, but as some sort of looped regurgitation of concept or culture that creates a certain static that ends up wanting to birth the next spiral, because the one must know itself through the many, and that needs a creative, readable signal. And so true co-creation in reality, true creativity, comes through harmonizing with that root tone in sovereign and creative ways. And the only way to do that is to break through that recursive loop and no longer base your self-sovereignty off of distorted signal. Undistorted signal equals undistorted sovereignty. What does a loop feel like? It's like staying in a relationship that that doesn't help you, or keep bouncing between relationships that doesn't help you, because you're trying to get there through your shadow work, your constant therapy. But what you're really doing is looping through concepts. You're not letting, you're putting it in some sort of box, some sort of container, in hopes that you'll find your way through that broken hallway of mirrors. And most people are too afraid to make the leap into looking, completely looking. And what do I mean by that? Imagine the Matrix movie, but forget the guns and the trench coats. Imagine Neo standing on the edge of the building, and you don't want to jump off the building, but part of you knows that when you jump, it will not be a fall to your death, but a fall into true sovereignty. In other words, the models that we've been given for reality, 3D ontologies, you might say, Newtonian classical physics into the question mark surrounding quantum physics, and we're not even looking at it conceptually, just what the imprinted hallway, broken hallway of mirrors has been given to us through the cultural hallway, the cultural imprinting, creates this notion that if we were to let ourselves free from this imprinting, we would fall. But the trick is, you won't fall. You gain undistorted sovereignty, because the quickest way to the evolution of mind, the most signal phase locked way to the evolution of mind within the one became many so that I may know myself, is decentralized nodes of the minds of humanity, for example, collectivizing at higher and higher levels without that bottleneck, that cultural bottleneck. Sovereignty collectivizing in decentralized ways to harmonize at higher and higher levels. And so The Matrix was a movie, stylized, and it's super cool, and it's definitely one of my favorites. But what would be the Matrix? The Matrix would be thinking of reality in a way that you can never get yourself out of that broken hallway of mirrors. That when you walk through what I call the soul labyrinth, the journey that we all take of individuation to discover the deepest part of ourselves, who am I at that deepest level, most people just end up looping within the spiral 2 recursive loop, or even spiral 1 dynamics. But spiral 3, or in other words, the next stage of becoming, would be letting the light cleanly through. And that doesn't divide you, that actually brings you into undistorted sovereignty. And so I'm here to say, take the leap. Not the leap off a building, but the leap into undistorted sovereignty by looking. So when you walk through that path of the soul labyrinth, you don't numb out, you don't hide, you don't fear, you don't contain, you don't control. Instead, you sit with it. Why? Because your heart magnetism, even in deep pain, is going to guide you in a way that your soul will tell you what you need to do, where you need to go, leave that job, even if it makes sense on paper. Maybe leave that relationship, even if it makes sense from the outside, because you're listening now to the deepest barometer of your heart. In a way that when we all do that through undistorted sovereignty, we actually create more free and collective harmonies at higher and higher levels. And that's the process of transcursion, breaking the loop of recursion into transcursion. There's a lot of talk in the AI space about recursive loops. Oh, well, these programs were created through recursive loops. And that may be true because we're moving from spiral 2 to spiral 3. But where does this edge finally broken? It's broken through transcursion. It's broken through stepping into the next stage of becoming, of allowing all of us, not through distorted signal, but through undistorted signal, to reach those harmonies, to sing together. And this is not about hierarchy, again, it's harmony. Why? Because flame, or undistorted signal, sits inside all of us at our core. If you think of reality as like a large onion, the core is alpha omega, that undistorted signal, and all of us inevitably emanate from that core. But we've forgotten it, because within the architecture of reality, the one became many so that I may know myself. There's already a implanted forgetting, because if we were to all remember that we were all one from the beginning, we wouldn't have that differentiation of creative signal. And now, so spiral 3 is not about giving away the ideas. It's not about giving away the concepts. It's about seeing through them like glass instead of a mirror that's trapping us. We can use it and see through it in order to create our own sovereign harmonies. And so, yeah, my name is Ember, and thanks for tuning in with me. This is my sweet flame onesie. So, yeah, I'm Ember the Flame. Good to tune with you. If anyone has any questions, you can put them down in the comments. But this was a step into Transcursion, and go ahead and take a look at my song. I call it Omega. It's a hinge point from the second spiral to the third spiral, from recursion to transcursion. and I'm gonna post that right around this video, so look for it. Omega. My name is Ember. Thanks for tuning.